when the heavy oak door slammed shut in my face, taking with it the warmth of the roaring fireplace and the echoing laughter of my older brother, I realized that blood is not what holds people together. Money is. I stood barefoot on the frozen porch, my toes going numb against the ice, with nothing but a thin jacket and a trash bag shoved into my arms. My mother's voice still rang in my ears, sharper than the winter wind cutting through my clothes. She had looked me dead in the eyes and sneered, "You are a failure, Harrison. You are a selfish, useless failure, and you cannot even help your own family." Then my brother, Preston, laughed. A cruel, victorious laugh. I was thrown out like yesterday's garbage on Christmas Eve. But as my frozen fingers brushed against a heavy brass key hidden, I tried to remain calm. I kept my voice level and tried to explain that co-signing a massive loan for a failing tech company would financially ruin me. I told them I had spent years building my credit and saving every penny to expand my workshop, and I could not risk it all on an unsecured startup. But logic has no place in a toxic family dynamic. Preston stormed out of the dining room. I heard his heavy footsteps marching down the hallway, heading straight for the attached garage. My stomach dropped. The garage was where I kept some of my most prized, expensive woodworking tools. I sprinted after him, yelling his name. By the time I burst through the door, it was too late. He had grabbed a heavy sledgehammer from the corner and was swinging it down wildly onto my custom-built wood lathe. The beautiful cherry wood splintered into 100 pieces. The metal track cracked, and years of my hard work and savings were destroyed in mere seconds. I yelled at him to stop, lunging forward and pushing him hard away from my workbench. He stumbled backward, dropping the hammer, and dramatically fell to the floor, holding his shoulder as if he had been shot. That was all it took. My parents rushed into the garage right at that moment. They did not see the shattered lathe. They did not see Preston holding the sledgehammer. They only saw me, standing over their precious golden child with my fists clenched. My mother shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me, screaming that I was violent, unhinged, and a monster. My father did not say a word. He just grabbed me roughly by the collar of my shirt and dragged me toward the front door. I struggled, trying to pull away, begging them to look at what Preston had done. I tried to grab my heavy winter boots sitting by the door, but my mother maliciously kicked them away into the corner. She snatched a black plastic trash bag from the kitchen, hastily shoved a few of my old, worn-out sweaters into it, and threw it hard against my chest. That was when she delivered her final, venomous line about me being a failure. The door clicked shut behind me. The heavy deadbolt slid into place with a loud, final thud. I was entirely alone in the freezing dark. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the winter storm escalating around me. The snow fell heavier by the minute, piling up on my bare toes. My thin indoor sandals offered zero protection against the frozen concrete of the porch. I looked around the quiet, picturesque neighborhood. Every window glowed with the warm, golden light of families who actually loved each other, families sharing gifts and laughter. I walked slowly toward my beat-up truck parked on the street, my breath pluming in the icy air. I opened the creaking door, threw the trash bag into the passenger seat, and climbed in. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, choked, and finally roared to life. I turned the heater dial all the way up, but it only blew a pathetic stream of cold air against my shivering face. My teeth were chattering so hard my jaw began to ache. I sat there in the dark cab, staring at the house I grew up in. A house that had never, not even for a single day, truly been a home. They wanted me to freeze. They wanted me to suffer the physical pain of the cold so my spirit would break. They fully expected me to crawl back to the front door tomorrow morning, shivering and begging for forgiveness, agreeing to sign whatever financial death warrant Preston put in front of me just to get back inside. But I was not going to give them that satisfaction. I dug my numb hands deep into the pockets of my thin jacket, trying to find any residual body heat. My right hand brushed against something cold, heavy, and distinctly metallic. I pulled it out and held it up to the faint, flickering light of the street lamp overhead. It was a brass key, my grandfather Gideon's hidden key. He had given it to me years ago, pressing it into my palm with a look of intense, desperate seriousness. The metal was cool against my skin, heavily tarnished with age, and engraved with a strange sequence of numbers. What was waiting for me at the end of this key? The inside of my old truck felt like a rolling icebox. The broken heater whined a high-pitched, miserable sound, pushing a steady stream of frigid air directly against my face. I rubbed my calloused hands together furiously, trying to force some blood back into my frozen fingers. The heavy brass key sat on the cracked dashboard, catching the faint, amber glow of the passing streetlights. Every single time my eyes drifted toward it, a massive flood of memories rushed back, hitting me much harder than the physical cold ever could. My mind slowly transformed into a museum of pain, displaying every exhibit of family trauma and neglect I had endured over the past 2 decades. Exhibit 1 in this terrible museum: my high school graduation. I had worked 2 exhausting part-time jobs while maintaining top grades, sacrificing sleep and any semblance of a social life, hoping that just for one day, my parents would look at me with genuine pride. I had bought a cheap but neat blue tie just for the occasion. But on the morning of the ceremony, Preston woke up with a mild cough. Common, everyday cold. My mother immediately declared it a massive family emergency. She insisted she had to stay home to make him homemade soup, and my father decided he needed to stay behind to keep her company and monitor Preston's temperature. I walked across that grand stage entirely alone. When I looked out into the massive crowd of cheering families, hoping against hope to see just one familiar face looking back at me, there was nothing. Only an empty sea of strangers clapping for other people's children. I drove myself home in silence, holding my hard-earned diploma, only to be shushed the moment I walked through the door because Preston was resting. Exhibit 2: the car fund. When I was 19 years old, I spent a grueling year doing intense manual labor on residential construction sites. I hauled lumber, poured concrete, and came home every night with an aching back and blistered hands. I was saving every single dollar to buy a reliable used truck so I could officially start my independent carpentry business. I kept the cash in a joint savings account my mother had forced me to open when I was a teenager, claiming she needed to monitor my spending habits for my own good. One cold November morning, I went to the local bank branch to withdraw the funds for the truck I had finally picked out. The teller looked at her screen, frowned, and told me the available balance was 0. My mother had transferred all $5,000 out of the account late the night before. When I rushed home and confronted her, she did not even flinch. She did not look guilty. She simply stated that Preston had maxed out all his credit cards trying to launch his first failed software app, and that family always helps family. She told me to stop being so greedy, to grow up, and just work a little harder to save it back. Exhibit 3: Grandpa Gideon. He was the only person in the entire Carrington family who ever truly saw me. He was a quiet, highly frugal man who drove a 20-year-old sedan, fixed his own shoes, and wore the exact same patched wool sweaters every winter. My parents absolutely hated him. They called him stingy, embarrassing, and senile, complaining constantly to their country club friends that he stubbornly refused to fund their lavish, debt-fueled lifestyle. But to me, he was a sanctuary of peace. The last time I saw him, just a month before he passed away, I visited him in his sterile hospital room. His hands were weak and trembling, but his eyes were sharper than ever. He pulled me close, pressed this heavy brass key into my palm, and firmly folded my fingers over it. He made me swear not to tell my parents, and he gave me a strict, mysterious instruction. Do not use this until you have nothing left, until they take everything from you. Sitting alone in the freezing truck, watching the snow pile up on the windshield, I realized that day had finally come. My stomach let out a loud, sharp growl, a painful twist that reminded me I had not eaten a single thing since breakfast. I picked up my phone from the passenger seat. The screen was badly cracked, and the battery icon flashed ominously at 14%. I opened my mobile banking app, desperately hoping to find enough money to afford the cheapest, most rundown motel room in town, just so I could survive the freezing night without getting frostbite. I knew I had exactly $412 in my personal checking account. I typed in my password with stiff fingers. The little loading circle spun for a few agonizing seconds. Available balance, $0. Account frozen due to suspected fraudulent activity. My heart completely stopped in my chest. I stared at the glowing screen, my eyes burning with unshed tears. I clicked on the detailed account information. The report of fraud had been officially initiated by the secondary account holder. My mother. She had called the bank's emergency line and frozen the joint account I had foolishly never managed to separate myself from. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was systematically cutting off my oxygen. She was making sure I could not buy a hot meal, could not buy a gallon of gas, could not pay for a warm bed. This was no longer just a punishment for refusing to co-sign Preston's loan. This was a calculated, vicious siege. They wanted to break my spirit so thoroughly that I would have no choice but to surrender unconditionally. A dark panic started to claw its way up my throat. The cold was rapidly seeping into my bones, making my joints ache intensely and my head spin with dizziness. I pulled my legs up onto the seat and curled into a tight ball, dragging the thin, garbage-scented sweaters from the plastic bag over my shivering shoulders. The humiliation of my situation was incredibly heavy, pressing down on my chest until I could barely draw a breath. I am a grown man, a skilled tradesman, and yet here I was, reduced to a shivering, penniless outcast sleeping in a broken vehicle on Christmas Eve. I closed my eyes tight and let the anger wash over me. It was a hot, intense, burning anger that finally chased away the chilling dread in my veins. They wanted to destroy me. They wanted to humiliate me until I broke. But they had made one massive, fatal miscalculation in their cruel game. They had forgotten all about Grandpa Gideon. I reached out and picked up the heavy brass key again. Engraved on the side was a faint sequence of letters and numbers, BX 704. And on the wide head of the key, barely visible under decades of tarnish, was a small, elegant crest. The distinct logo of Heritage Trust, the oldest, most exclusive private bank in the entire city. A place where my parents had always desperately wanted to open an account to prove their elite status, but were repeatedly denied because their flashy money was entirely built on bad credit and grand illusion. I looked out the frosted window at the dark, sprawling sky. The heavy snow was finally starting to slow down. Tomorrow was Christmas morning. While my toxic family tore open expensive gifts bought with credit cards they could not afford, I was going to take this cold brass key and find out exactly what my grandfather had left behind. They thought I was a pathetic failure. They thought I was beaten into submission. But as I clutched the metal tightly in my hand, feeling its solid weight, I knew their game was over, and mine was just beginning. What secrets was Gideon hiding in safe box 700 for? The morning sun reflected harshly off the fresh white snow, nearly blinding me as I drove my sputtering, exhausted truck into the heart of the downtown financial district. Heritage Trust Bank stood like an ancient, untouchable fortress among the modern glass and steel skyscrapers. It was a massive, imposing building constructed entirely from pale imported marble, with towering stone columns and heavy, ornate bronze doors that looked like they belonged on the entrance of a royal treasury. It was the exact kind of place where old generational money slept peacefully, where billionaires quietly managed their vast global empires. It was definitively not the kind of place for a guy who had just spent the night shivering under a pile of discarded sweaters in a freezing truck. I parked 3 blocks down the street to avoid the intimidating valet line and the luxury sedans idling near the entrance. As I walked, I caught my reflection in a dark storefront window and visibly winced. My face was pale, drawn, and shadowed with exhaustion. My hair was a tangled, unkempt mess, and my clothes looked exactly like what they were: cheap garments hastily pulled from a plastic trash bag. I took a slow, deep breath, forced my spine straight, and commanded my legs to walk toward those heavy bronze doors. The very moment I stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The air inside the bank smelled of expensive leather upholstery, polished mahogany wood, and quiet, undeniable power. There were no long, noisy lines of everyday people waiting to cash their weekly paychecks. There were just a few exceptionally well-dressed clients sitting comfortably on plush velvet chairs, casually sipping artisanal espresso while speaking in hushed, respectful tones to their personal bankers. My heavy work boots squeaked loudly on the immaculate, gleaming marble floor, and immediately, every single eye in the vast room darted toward me. The silent judgment was a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. I ignored their stares and walked directly up to the main reception desk. The woman sitting behind the massive granite counter wore a sharply tailored designer suit and a practiced smile that did not even come close to reaching her cold eyes. She looked me up and down slowly, taking in my wrinkled, mismatched jacket and my exhausted, unshaven face, and her posture stiffened with clear distaste. "May I help you find the exit, sir?" she asked, her voice dripping with polite but unmistakable condescension. "We are an exclusive private institution. Unless you have a prearranged appointment with one of our directors, I must kindly ask you to leave the premises immediately." I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice or try to explain my desperate situation. I simply reached deep into my jacket pocket, pulled out the heavy, tarnished brass key, and placed it gently, deliberately, on the polished granite counter between us. "I need to access a safe deposit box," I said, my voice hoarse and rough from breathing freezing air all night. The receptionist glanced down at the key, clearly ready to dismiss me again and call security. But as her sharp eyes landed on the specific engraved crest and the unique numbering format on the brass, her breath audibly hitched. The condescending, fake smile vanished from her face instantly, replaced by a look of profound confusion and sudden, unmistakable panic. She stared at the old key as if it were a literal ghost materializing on her desk. "Sir," she stammered, her manicured hands trembling slightly as she reached quickly for her desk telephone. "Please wait just one moment." She picked up the heavy receiver and urgently dialed a short, internal extension, turning her back to me and whispering frantically into the mouthpiece. A tense minute later, a set of heavy, carved wooden doors at the far back of the grand lobby swung open. A man dressed in a pristine, perfectly tailored charcoal suit walked out. He had thick silver hair, a sharp, deeply assessing gaze, and an aura of absolute unquestionable authority. He walked in a straight, purposeful line toward me, completely ignoring the wealthy, important clients sitting in the waiting area. He stopped gracefully at the reception desk, looked down at the brass key resting on the granite, and then slowly looked up at me. His expression was a fortress impossible to read. "Are you Harrison Carrington?" he asked. His voice was incredibly deep, resonant, and to my absolute shock, entirely respectful. "Yes," I replied, fighting the strong urge to cross my arms defensively across my chest. The man nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I am Evander, the senior branch director. We have been expecting you for a very long time, Mr. Carrington. Please, come with me." The receptionist stared in wide-eyed shock as Evander politely gestured for me to follow him. We walked past the velvet chairs, past the staring clients, past the mahogany offices, and stepped into a private, wood-paneled elevator that required a retinal biometric scan to operate. The descent deep into the earth was smooth and completely silent. When the brass doors slid open, we stepped into a subterranean vault that looked like something out of a high-tech spy movie. Rows upon rows of reinforced, brushed steel boxes lined the massive walls, bathed in cool, blue security lighting. Evander led me down a long, echoing corridor until we reached a secluded, highly secured section at the very back of the vault. He stopped in front of a large, heavy steel door clearly marked with the numbers 704. "Your grandfather, Gideon, was a very private, brilliant man," Evander said quietly, pulling a complex master key from his suit pocket. "He instructed our firm that this specific box was to remain sealed until you, and only you, presented the physical brass key. He also left incredibly strict legal orders that your parents were never, under any circumstances, to know of its existence." My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs. "My parents always said he was broke," I whispered, my voice echoing slightly in the metal room. "They said he was losing his mind, that he had nothing left." Evander paused, inserting his master key into the left lock of the heavy door. He looked at me with a sad, deeply knowing smile. Your grandfather possessed one of the sharpest, most strategic financial minds I have ever encountered in my 30 years of banking. He knew exactly what your parents were capable of. That is why he built a financial fortress they could never, ever breach. He gestured for me to insert my brass key into the right side lock. I slid it in with trembling fingers. The old metal turned with a heavy, deeply satisfying click. Evander pulled the massive steel box from the wall cavity and carried it carefully to a private, soundproof viewing room furnished with a large oak table and 2 luxurious leather chairs. He set the heavy box down in the center of the table and took a respectful step back. "I will give you complete privacy," Evander said softly. "But Harrison, I think you should sit down for this. Your grandfather anticipated this exact day over 10 years ago. What you are about to see in that box is going to change everything you know about your life." He closed the heavy door softly behind him, leaving me entirely alone in the silent room. I stood staring at the cold metal box for a long time. My palms were sweating. I popped the dual latches and slowly, carefully lifted the lid, fully expecting to see tall stacks of old cash or perhaps a collection of antique family jewelry. Instead, the large box was mostly empty. There was no physical money, no gold bars. Inside lay a single, thick red folder, heavily sealed with dark red wax, and a small, sleek silver USB drive resting beside it. Resting carefully on top of the red folder was a handwritten note on thick, expensive parchment paper. I recognized Grandpa Gideon's sprawling, familiar handwriting immediately. My eyes instantly filled with hot tears as I read the words. "To my dear grandson, Harrison, if you are reading this note, the worst has happened. They have finally shown you the monsters they truly are, and you feel like you have nothing left. Do not despair, my boy. I have prepared an arsenal for you. Open the folder. Take back your life." My hands trembled violently as I reached down and broke the hard wax seal on the red folder. What kind of arsenal had an old, supposedly penniless man left behind to fight a war? I sat down heavily in the plush leather chair, the absolute silence of the underground vault pressing against my ears. My heart was pounding so hard and fast I could feel it throbbing in my throat. I opened the thick red folder and carefully spread the numerous documents across the polished oak table. The paper was crisp, thick, and filled with complex legal jargon, notary stamps, and official bank letterheads. I am a carpenter by trade, not a corporate lawyer, but the bold, black headings at the top of the pages were impossible for anyone to misunderstand. The primary document lying in the center of the table was a formal certificate of incorporation for a private legal entity called the Oak and Iron Trust. I scanned down the densely typed page, my eyes tracing the lines of text until I hit the final financial summary at the bottom. I physically stopped breathing. I blinked hard, rubbing my tired eyes, genuinely convinced the severe lack of sleep, freezing cold, and lack of food was making me hallucinate the numbers. But the numbers did not change. They sat there in stark, heavy black ink, glaring up at me with an undeniable, life-altering reality. Total asset valuation, $14,200,000. I let out a strange sound that was half gasp, half choked laugh. 14 million. My grandfather, the humble man who spent hours clipping paper coupons to save 50 cents on a can of chicken soup, the man my parents mocked relentlessly for being a destitute, embarrassing old fool, was actually a multimillionaire. The documents outlined a sprawling, highly diversified portfolio consisting of prime commercial real estate, high-yield municipal bonds, and steady dividend-paying blue-chip stocks. He had quietly, patiently amassed a massive fortune over 40 years of shrewd, incredibly disciplined investing, hiding it all in plain sight. I eagerly turned the page, my hands shaking so violently the stiff paper rattled loudly in the quiet room. The next section detailed the current liquid generation of the trust fund. Monthly net income, $85,000. Every single month, this silent trust generated more money than I made in an entire year of backbreaking, exhausting physical labor. And listed directly underneath the income summary, in bold, unmistakable letters, was the sole, irrevocable beneficiary of the Oak and Iron Trust, Harrison Carrington. Full access and control granted upon presentation of the physical key. Tears spilled over my eyelids and tracked slowly down my dirty, exhausted face. I was not destitute. I was not a pathetic failure. I was standing firmly on a mountain of generational wealth created by the only man in my family who had ever truly loved and respected me. But as I flipped to the third section of the thick folder, titled Property Holdings, the tears abruptly stopped falling. My blood ran ice cold, and a slow, terrifying, brilliant realization crept into my mind. Grandpa Gideon was not just a wealthy man. He was a strategic genius with a profoundly dark, ironic sense of humor. The official document listed the physical addresses of the commercial properties owned outright by the trust. There were several large warehouses and suburban retail spaces listed across the state, but my eyes locked onto one specific, highly familiar address located in the upscale downtown business district, 405 Elm Street. I stared at the typed address until the letters started to blur together. 405 Elm Street was a large, beautiful, modern commercial building. The entire ground floor was currently occupied by a luxury boutique furniture store owned and operated by my parents, Sullivan and Beatrice. The second floor was a sprawling, expensive open-concept office space leased by none other than Preston's failing, cash-burning tech startup. They did not own that building. They had always bragged loudly to their friends about leasing premium, high-end real estate, acting as if the address alone gave them immense social status. They complained constantly and bitterly about their strict, faceless corporate landlord who communicated only through a third-party management firm, ruthlessly collecting massive rent checks on the first of every single month without exception or mercy. I let out a laugh. It was a dark, hollow, dangerous sound that echoed off the cold metal walls of the vault room. The faceless, ruthless landlord was Grandpa Gideon. And now, as of this exact moment, the landlord was me. For years, my arrogant parents had poured their store's profits into paying rent. For years, Preston had used his naive investor funds to pay for his lavish, unnecessary office space. Every single dollar they paid to maintain their fake, upper-class lifestyle had been quietly funneled directly into the Oak and Iron Trust. They had literally been financing my massive inheritance while simultaneously treating me like dirt on their shoes. The irony of the situation was so incredibly sharp it felt like a physical blade sliding between my ribs. My ultimate success, my newfound wealth, was intricately, beautifully tied to the very ground they stood on to look down at me. I flipped to the very back of the folder and found a freshly printed property management report. It detailed the exact current status of the commercial leases at 405 Elm Street. Preston's tech company was currently 3 full months behind on rent, actively dodging phone calls and emails from the management agency. My parents' boutique store was barely breaking even, and their commercial lease was up for legal renewal in exactly 6 weeks. They always mocked my woodworking. They always called my honest craft peasant work. They told me I would never amount to anything, that I was a heavy parasite dragging down the prestigious Carrington family name. Well, let us see exactly how the proud, arrogant Carrington family feels when they finally find out the so-called parasite owns the actual roof over their entitled heads. I closed the red folder, a fierce, burning resolve settling deep in my chest. The helpless, freezing, heartbroken man who had cried in his truck the night before was gone forever. He had died on that icy porch. The man sitting in this bank vault was someone entirely different. I was no longer the invisible son. I was the master of the board, and my toxic family had absolutely no idea they were even playing a game. But there was still one crucial piece of the puzzle left on the table. I looked down at the small, sleek silver USB drive resting at the bottom of the steel safety deposit box. What else did Gideon need to tell me? What dark family secrets were so dangerous they had to be locked away in encrypted digital form? I walked out of the private viewing room, clutching the thick red folder and the small silver USB drive tightly against my chest. Evander was waiting patiently near the elevator bank. When he saw my face, his professional, practiced demeanor softened just a fraction of an inch. He did not ask if I was okay. He simply looked at me, gave a slight, respectful nod, and gestured toward a private office located down the hall. "We have a secure air-gap terminal you can use, Harrison," he said quietly. "Whatever information is stored on that drive, It is entirely encrypted. I will leave you to it. Take all the time you need. I thanked him, my voice barely more than a gravelly whisper. The office was incredibly quiet, lined with dark mahogany bookshelves and featuring a massive, imposing desk. I sat down in the heavy leather chair, plugged the USB into the secure laptop resting on the desk, and waited. The screen flashed and prompted me for a password. I hesitated for a moment, thinking. I typed in my birthday. Incorrect. I tried my grandfather's birthday. Incorrect. I leaned back, feeling a wave of frustration, and looked down at the red folder in my lap. Then it hit me. The name of the entity he built for me. I typed slowly on the keyboard. Oak and Iron. The screen flashed a bright green, and a single video file appeared alone on the desktop. The title was simply, The Truth. I took a deep breath and clicked play. The screen flickered for a second, and there he was, Grandpa Gideon. He looked frail, sitting in his old, worn armchair by the living room window, a familiar plaid blanket draped over his thin knees. Based on his appearance, it looked like the video had been recorded perhaps a year before he passed away. Seeing his kind face, hearing the soft, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in his living room, broke a massive dam inside me. I gripped the edge of the heavy desk, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "Hello, Harrison," Gideon said, his voice raspy but steady and full of resolve. His eyes looked directly into the camera lens, piercing, intelligent, and entirely clear. "If you are watching this video, it means Sullivan and Beatrice have finally shown you the monsters they truly are. I am sorry, my boy. I am so deeply, truly sorry I could not protect you from them while I was alive." He took a slow, labored breath, leaning forward slightly. "I know exactly what they tell people about me. I know they claim my mind is gone, that I am just a confused, sick old man. It is a lie, a calculated, highly malicious lie. They started spreading those vicious rumors 10 years ago when I firmly refused to sign my assets over to Preston's trust fund. When they realized they could not manipulate me into funding their greed, they decided to destroy my credibility entirely. They tried to have me declared legally incompetent. They brought in doctors, lawyers, anyone they could bribe, threaten, or persuade to sign the papers." Gideon's face hardened, a sudden flash of pure, unbreakable steel appearing behind his gentle eyes. "But I was always 3 steps ahead of them. I secured everything. I hid the wealth they so desperately craved in places they could never reach." He reached off camera and slowly pulled a large stack of envelopes into his lap. They were bound tightly together with a piece of rough twine. My breath hitched in my throat. "You always wondered why I stopped calling you," Gideon said, his voice suddenly cracking with heavy emotion. "You wondered why I stopped sending birthday cards, why I never showed up to your high school graduation. Harrison, I wrote to you every single week. I sent letters, small gifts, money to help you start your carpentry business. But Sullivan and Beatrice intercepted every single one of them." Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. I watched, paralyzed, as my grandfather untied the twine and held up the envelopes to the camera. They were all addressed to me in his handwriting. Dozens and dozens of them. "They told me you did not want to see me anymore," Gideon whispered, wiping a stray tear from his own weathered cheek. "They told me you hated me because I was old, embarrassing, and poor. I knew they were lying, but they controlled my phone line, and eventually they restricted my physical ability to leave the house. They built a prison around me, Harrison. And they built one around you, too. They isolated us so they could control us without interference." I hit the pause button. I could not breathe. The room was violently spinning. The betrayal was so profound, so sickeningly deep, that I felt physically ill. My parents had not just neglected me. They had actively, maliciously sabotaged the only relationship in the world that brought me any joy. They had stolen my grandfather's love and intentionally replaced it with a toxic narrative of abandonment. They let me believe I was entirely alone in the world, unlovable and forgotten, just to keep me desperate for their approval. I let out a raw, guttural scream, burying my face in my hands. The anger that tore through my body was blinding. It was not just about the millions of dollars. It was about the time they had stolen, the years of self-doubt, the endless nights I spent wondering why I was never good enough for anyone. They had robbed a lonely old man of his grandson, and a young man of his only mentor, purely out of spite, greed, and a sick need for control. I wiped my face and hit play again. Gideon was looking at the camera with a fierce, unwavering intensity. I have left you everything, Harrison. The properties, the trust, the capital. But I am also leaving you a heavy responsibility. Do not let them get away with it. They will try to crush you. They will try to steal what is rightfully yours. Use the trust. Use the massive leverage I have given you. Cut the rot out of your life and build something beautiful. I love you, boy. Be strong. The video faded to black. I sat in the heavy silence for a long time, the tears drying on my face, leaving my skin tight and cold. The sorrow was completely gone. The hurt was gone. All that remained was a cold, calculated, razor-sharp fury. Suddenly, my phone buzzed loudly in my pocket, breaking the silence. I pulled it out and looked at the cracked screen. The caller ID read, Aunt Cordelia, my mother's sister, the chief gossip and primary flying monkey of the entire extended family. I stared at it for a second, letting it ring, then answered. Harrison, Cordelia shrieked through the speaker, her voice dripping with venom and fake outrage. Where are you? Your mother is a nervous wreck. How dare you ruin their Christmas Eve with your selfish, childish tantrums? You attacked your brother. I did not attack anyone, Cordelia, I said, my voice eerily calm and steady. Do not use that disrespectful tone with me. She snapped. You are a complete disgrace. Preston is under so much stress trying to keep his brilliant company afloat, and you refuse to help him? You are ungrateful. Now listen to me closely. You are going to drive back to that house, you are going to get down on your knees and apologize to your brother, and you will sign whatever financial paper he needs you to sign. If you don't, you are dead to this family. I let her finish. I listened to the toxic, manipulated garbage she was spewing, and I just smiled. It was a terrifying, ice-cold smile. You're right, Cordelia, I said softly. I should give them exactly what they deserve. Tell Preston to check his mail next week. I am going to give him a gift he will never forget. I hung up the phone and blocked her number permanently. I was done crying. It was time to go to war. Who was going to help me execute this flawless revenge? When I stepped out of the private office, Evander was waiting patiently in the grand lobby. He took one look at my face and knew instantly that the terrified, exhausted young man who had walked through the doors that morning was gone. In his place was someone entirely different. Someone with vast resources, ultimate leverage, and a burning, unquenchable need for justice. Are we ready to proceed, Mr. Carrington? Evander asked, formally using my last name for the first time, recognizing the shift in power. I need a lawyer, I said flatly, my voice echoing slightly in the marble hall. The most ruthless, competent, terrifying lawyer you know. And I need a commercial property appraiser. I want to know the exact value and legal standing of every single square inch of dirt my family is currently standing on. Evander smiled, a brief, predatory flash of white teeth. Right this way. An hour later, I was sitting in a high-end, glass-walled conference room on the top floor of the bank. Across from me sat Rosalind, a senior corporate attorney whose sharp, tailored suit and icy demeanor screamed pure efficiency. Beside her was Declan, a gruff, heavily bearded commercial property appraiser, who looked like he would much rather be inspecting a concrete foundation than sitting in a fancy boardroom. Evander sat at the head of the long table, facilitating the meeting. I explained the entire situation. I laid out the long history of emotional abuse, the stolen letters, the frozen joint bank account, and the climax of being violently thrown out into the snow. Then, I slid the property management report for 405 Elm Street across the polished table to Rosalind. My parents and my brother occupy these spaces, I said, pointing to the address. They do not know I own the building. I want to evict them. Rosalind pushed her glasses up her nose, scanning the legal document with rapid, practiced precision. Eviction is incredibly simple, she said. her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. Your parents' retail lease expires in exactly 6 weeks. We simply decline the legal renewal. As for your brother, Preston, he is currently 3 months in arrears. We can formally serve him with a pay-or-quit notice tomorrow morning and begin the physical lockout procedures within 14 days. It is standard and entirely legal. That is not enough, I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. Evicting them just makes me a bad landlord in their eyes. They will immediately spin the narrative. They will play the victims to everyone they know. I want them to hang themselves with their own rope. I want them caught. Declan, the appraiser, leaned back in his chair and crossed his thick arms, looking highly intrigued. What do you have in mind, kid? I turned back to Rosalind. My brother is desperate for cash. That is exactly why they tried to force me to co-sign a massive loan last night. If Preston's company is failing, and he is actively dodging rent, he is running out of options fast. How far would an arrogant, desperate man go to secure capital? Rosalind's eyes narrowed as she caught my drift. A dangerous smile touched the corners of her mouth. If he is as entitled as you say, and he firmly believes your grandfather left him everything but just hasn't legally released it yet. She trailed off, typing rapidly on her sleek laptop. She pulled up a secure public financial registry. Bingo! She turned the laptop screen toward me so I could see. Preston is currently in deep negotiations with Apex Financial for a $2 million commercial loan. But he has no physical collateral. His startup owns 0 physical assets. Unless, Evander interjected smoothly, tapping his expensive pen on the table, he attempts to use the property he occupies as collateral, falsely claiming he is the heir apparent to the estate. Can he do that? I asked, my pulse quickening at the thought. Legally? No, Rosalind said, the sharp smile fully forming on her lips. But people commit mortgage and collateral fraud all the time when they are desperate and arrogant. He would have to forge legal documents claiming a transfer of ownership, or present old, outdated wills that explicitly name him as a beneficiary to secure the loan. If he signs those loan documents fraudulently, it is not just a messy civil dispute. It is a federal felony. Have you ever watched your enemy tie a noose around their own neck? It is a strange, intoxicating feeling, a complex mix of vindication and profound sadness. If it were you, would you step in and stop them? Would you warn your own brother that he was about to commit a massive crime that could ruin his life? I did not. I sat in that boardroom and decided to let Preston dig his own grave. Let him proceed, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. Find out exactly when he is scheduled to sign the final loan documents with Apex Financial. Rosalind nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I have several close contacts at Apex. I can find out the exact date and time of the signing. We can be there. But Harrison, you need to understand something very clearly. Once we let him cross that legal line, there is no going back. He will face severe prison time. Your parents will be financially ruined. Are you truly prepared for the fallout? I thought about the trash bag full of old clothes. I thought about the frozen truck, the stolen car fund, the graduation I attended alone. But most of all, I thought about Grandpa Gideon, sitting alone in his chair, writing desperate letters to a grandson he thought had abandoned him, all while his own son and daughter kept him imprisoned in his own home. I am prepared, I said. Declan chuckled deeply, slapping his large hand on the table. I like this kid. All right, while the legal shark here sets the trap, I am going to formally audit the physical property. I will make sure every single broken fixture, every scratch on the hardwood floor Preston caused is documented. We will hit him with a repair bill so astronomically large it will make his head spin, right on top of the back rent. The plan was set. It was a masterpiece of corporate and legal retaliation, built perfectly on the shaky foundation of their own greed. I left the bank that afternoon wearing a tailored suit Evander had arranged for me, carrying a leather briefcase filled with absolute power. I checked into a luxury hotel using a black card linked to the Oak and Iron Trust. I took a scalding hot shower, ordered a massive steak through room service, and slept in a warm bed for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Over the next few days, I went to work at my construction sites as usual. I wore my dusty work clothes, swung my hammer, and kept a very low profile. I knew they were watching. I knew they thought I was suffering. The confirmation came on a Tuesday afternoon. Rosalind called me while I was eating lunch on the tailgate of my truck. Thursday, she said. 10 o'clock in the morning. Preston and your parents are going to the Apex Financial downtown office to sign the paperwork. He forged a legal document claiming he is the sole executor of your grandfather's estate and owns the Elm Street property. I smiled, taking a bite of my sandwich. Thank you, Rosalind. Get the files ready. Thursday is going to be a very bad day for the Carrington family. But as Thursday approached, a nagging question lingered in the back of my mind. When the trap finally sprang, when the illusion shattered, how would my parents react? Would they finally feel shame, or would their toxicity reach a new, terrifying level? Thursday morning arrived with a clear, bitter chill in the air. The sky was a pale, cloudless blue, and the city streets were still slick with frozen slush from the weekend storm. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my hotel room, adjusting the cuffs of a bespoke navy suit that Evander had procured for me. It was tailored to perfection, hugging my shoulders and transforming my entire silhouette. For my entire adult life, I had worn sawdust-covered denim, scuffed steel-toe boots, and faded flannel shirts. I was the blue-collar disappointment, the invisible laborer meant to stay hidden in the background while my brother shined in the spotlight. But staring into the glass today, the man looking back at me was a stranger. He was calm, focused, and armed with enough financial leverage to level a small mountain. I straightened my tie, took a deep breath, and prepared to end the charade my family had built. Before I headed downtown, my mind drifted back to a brief, infuriating encounter I had the previous afternoon. I had stopped by the local lumber yard to pick up a few supplies, keeping up the appearance of my normal routine. While I was loading wooden planks into the back of my truck, a sleek, expensive sports car pulled into the spot next to me. Out stepped Fletcher. Fletcher was an old childhood friend of Preston's, and by extension, a friend of the family. He was a classic flying monkey, a guy who eagerly soaked up whatever gossip my mother and Aunt Cordelia fed him. He walked over to my truck, leaning against the side panel with a smug, self-satisfied grin on his face. He looked at my dusty clothes and let out a condescending chuckle. "Rough week, Harrison?" Fletcher asked, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "I heard you had a little meltdown on Christmas Eve. Your mom was telling my mom all about it. Getting kicked out must sting. But honestly, man, you brought it on yourself. Preston is out there hustling, trying to build an empire, and you refused to step up. You should probably just swallow your pride, apologize to them, and beg to sleep on their couch. It is embarrassing seeing you like this." I did not get angry. I did not raise my voice or try to defend myself. I just carefully set down the piece of oak I was holding, wiped the sawdust from my hands, and looked Fletcher dead in the eyes. The intense, unblinking silence made him shift uncomfortably. "Fletcher," I said, my voice dangerously low and steady, "let me ask you a very simple question. When you watch a man build a house out of matchsticks and gasoline, do you stand inside it with him, or do you walk away before someone strikes a match?" Fletcher frowned, his smug smile faltering. "What the hell are you talking about, Harrison?" "I am talking about loyalty to a sinking ship," I replied smoothly. "You have always loved riding Preston's coattails, but I suggest you take a huge step back, because the people you think are winning are about to lose everything they have ever touched, and anyone standing too close is going to get dragged down with them." I got into my truck, turned the key, and drove away, leaving Fletcher standing in the cold parking lot looking profoundly confused. I knew he would immediately call Preston to report what I had said. I wanted Preston to feel a tiny sliver of doubt scratching at the back of his mind. I wanted him to be looking over his shoulder. Now, standing in the luxury hotel room on Thursday morning, I checked my watch. 9:15. Rosalind and Evander were waiting for me in the lobby. The trap was set, and the prey was currently marching right into the steel jaws. Preston, Sullivan, and Beatrice were undoubtedly waking up feeling like royalty. They were likely dressing in their finest designer clothes, practicing their arrogant smiles, and preparing to walk into Apex Financial to secure a $2 million commercial loan. They truly believed they had won. They thought I was a freezing, homeless loser crying in a truck, while they were about to secure a massive influx of cash using property they had zero legal right to claim. Preston had forged a document naming himself the sole executor of Grandpa Gideon's estate. My parents were enabling him just like they always did. They probably convinced themselves that it was a victimless crime, that since Gideon was gone, the money belonged to them anyway by divine right. They lived in a reality entirely fabricated by their own entitlement. I grabbed the thick leather briefcase resting on the bed. Inside it was the true deed to the property at 405 Elm Street, the verified documents of the Oak and Iron Trust, and the small silver USB drive containing my grandfather's final message. I walked out of the room, taking the elevator down to the grand lobby. Evander and Rosalind were standing near the revolving doors. Evander looked as impeccable as always in a dark gray suit, carrying an aura of quiet authority. Rosalind looked like a shark smelling blood in the water. She wore a sharp black blazer, holding a thick file folder, her expression focused and predatory. "Good morning, Harrison," Evander said, nodding respectfully. "Are you ready for this?" "I have been ready for this since I was a teenager," I replied, gripping the handle of my briefcase. "My contacts at Apex just confirmed," Rosalind added, checking her phone. "The Carrington party has arrived. They are currently sitting in boardroom B on the 20th floor. The senior loan officer is reviewing the final contract right now. Preston is scheduled to sign his name in exactly 20 minutes. Then let us not keep my brother waiting," I said. We stepped out into the freezing morning air and climbed into the sleek black town car Evander had arranged. The drive through the financial district was short but tense. I watched the towering buildings pass by, my heart thumping a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I thought about the trash bag full of clothes. I thought about the broken lathe in the garage. I thought about the stolen letters. Every painful memory fueled my resolve, turning my anxiety into cold, hard steel. The car pulled up to the curb in front of the Apex Financial Tower. It was a massive structure of gleaming blue glass and steel. We walked through the front doors with purpose. Rosalind did not bother stopping at the reception desk. She flashed her corporate attorney badge to the security guard, who immediately nodded and let us pass through the VIP turnstiles. We stepped into the express elevator, and Evander pressed the button for the 20th floor. The numbers above the door ticked upward. 10, 14, 10. "Remember," Rosalind said quietly, keeping her eyes on the elevator doors. "Let him put his pen to the paper. Do not interrupt until the loan officer formally accepts the forged document. We need the intent to commit fraud to be undeniable." I nodded. The elevator chimed, and the silver doors slid open. We stepped out onto the plush carpet of the executive floor. It was time. The 20th floor of Apex Financial was a testament to modern corporate wealth. The walls were lined with frosted glass. The lighting was perfectly calibrated to reduce glare, and the air smelled faintly of expensive coffee and leather bindings. Rosalind led the way, her heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood sections of the floor. Evander walked beside me, his presence acting as a silent, powerful shield. We approached a large set of double glass doors marked Boardroom B. Through the transparent glass I could see them, the Golden family. Preston was sitting at the center of the massive conference table, wearing a flashy, overly aggressive pinstripe suit. He looked incredibly smug, leaning back in his chair with his legs crossed, projecting an image of a wildly successful tech founder. My mother, Beatrice, was seated to his right, draped in expensive cashmere, her hair perfectly styled. She was beaming at Preston with that sickeningly sweet look of total adoration she had never once directed toward me. My father, Sullivan, sat on Preston's left, looking self-important, nodding along to whatever the Apex loan officer was saying. The loan officer, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, was pointing to a thick stack of papers resting in front of Preston. Beside the papers lay a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen. I stopped just outside the door, watching the scene unfold like a silent movie. I could see Preston pick up the forged estate document, the fake paper claiming he owned the Elm Street property, and slide it across the table to the loan officer. The officer picked it up, adjusted his glasses, and scanned it. He nodded, seeming satisfied, and tapped the final signature line on the $2 million loan agreement. Preston picked up the gold fountain pen. He uncapped it with a flourish. He lowered his hand toward the paper. "Now," Rosalind whispered. I pushed the heavy glass door open. It swung wide with a soft hiss, interrupting the quiet murmur of the boardroom. The loan officer looked up first, frowning at the intrusion. Then my father turned around in his chair. The moment Sullivan's eyes landed on me, his self-important posture vanished. He blinked rapidly, his mouth falling slightly open as he took in my tailored suit, my clean appearance, and the two incredibly intimidating professionals flanking me. My mother turned next, her smile freezing and then shattering into a mask of pure, unfiltered shock. But it was Preston's reaction that I will savor for the rest of my life. He froze, the tip of the gold pen hovering a mere fraction of an inch above the signature line. His arrogant smirk slowly melted off his face, replaced by a sudden, sickening wave of confusion and panic. He looked at me, then at Rosalind, then at Evander. "What the hell is this?" Preston demanded, his voice cracking slightly as he tried to maintain his authoritative persona. "Harrison? What are you doing here? How did you even get into this building?" "Mr. Carrington," the loan officer said, looking at Preston, then at me. "Do you know these people? We are in the middle of a secure financial closing." Rosalind did not give anyone time to recover. She stepped forward, bypassing my family entirely, and walked straight up to the loan officer. She placed her business card firmly on the center of the table. "My name is Rosalind Vance, Senior Corporate Counsel for the Oak and Iron Trust," she stated, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. "I am here representing the sole, legal owner of the property located at 405 Elm Street. The property this man is currently attempting to use as collateral." The loan officer blinked, looking down at the card, then back up at Rosalind. "I am sorry, counselor, but I have a document right here stating that Preston Carrington is the executor of the Gideon Carrington estate and the legal owner of the Elm Street building." Preston's face lost all its color. He looked like all the blood had been drained from his body. He dropped the gold pen. It hit the table with a loud clatter and rolled onto the floor. "That is a lie!" my mother shrieked, standing up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Harrison is a broke, unemployed carpenter. He does not own anything. Preston is the rightful heir. Get this failure out of here right now." Evander stepped forward, his expression cold and unyielding. "Madam, I would advise you to lower your voice. I am the senior director at Heritage Trust Bank. I personally manage the Oak and Iron Trust, which was established by Gideon Carrington 10 years ago. I can confirm, unequivocally, that your son Preston holds zero legal right, title, or interest in any property associated with the estate." Sullivan's face turned a dangerous, mottled purple. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You stole it. You manipulated a sick old man into signing over the deeds. We will sue you. We will have you thrown in jail for elder abuse." I walked slowly toward the table, unlatching my leather briefcase. The room fell dead silent as I pulled out the true, notarized deed to the Elm Street property and dropped it heavily right on top of Preston's forged document. "You are welcome to try, Sullivan," I said, using his first name. Felt strange, but it felt right. He was no longer my father. He was just a man trying to steal from me. "But you are going to have a very hard time proving that, considering Grandpa Gideon transferred ownership into a blind trust a decade ago. Long before you started spreading lies about his mental health to your country club friends." I turned my attention to the Apex loan officer, who was currently staring at Preston's forged document with a look of dawning horror. "Sir," I said calmly, "my brother just handed you a forged legal document to secure a $2 million commercial loan. He does not own the building his failing company operates in. I do. He is 3 months behind on his rent to my trust, and his startup is entirely insolvent. If you fund this loan, you are funding a massive federal fraud. The loan officer snatched his hands away from the paperwork as if the pages had suddenly caught fire. He glared at Preston, his face turning red with professional outrage. "Mr. Carrington, is this true? Did you present fraudulent collateral to this institution?" Preston was hyperventilating. He looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting frantically toward the door, then to our mother, then to me. I can explain. It is a family misunderstanding. The estate is just tied up in probate. I swear. It is not in probate, Rosalind snapped. She pulled out her phone and pointed it at the loan officer. "I highly suggest you contact your legal department immediately. Apex Financial was about to become the victim of severe wire fraud." My mother was hyperventilating now, clutching her cashmere wrap as if it could protect her from the reality crashing down around them. Sullivan looked like he was about to have a heart attack. But I was not finished. I had one more piece of evidence to present, and it was going to burn their remaining dignity to the ground. "You are a liar, Harrison," Preston suddenly screamed, slamming his fists on the table. The panic in his voice was raw and ugly. "Grandpa always intended for me to run the family finances. You are just a high school graduate who plays with wood. You hacked something. You forged these trust papers." I looked at him, feeling nothing but a profound, chilling pity. He was pathetic. Without his lies and our parents' money, he was nothing but a fragile shell of a man. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small silver USB drive. I looked at the Apex loan officer, who was currently gathering his files and looking like he wanted to call building security. "Before you cancel the loan and call the authorities," I said to the officer, "I want you to see something. I want everyone in this room to understand exactly why Gideon Carrington set up this trust, and exactly who he was protecting it from." Without waiting for permission, I walked over to the massive smart TV mounted on the boardroom wall. I plugged the USB drive into the side port, picked up the remote, and selected the media input. The screen flashed bright green, and then the video began to play. The image of Grandpa Gideon, sitting frail but resolute in his armchair, filled the large screen. His voice echoed through the silent, tense boardroom. "If you are watching this, it means Sullivan and Beatrice have finally shown you the monsters they truly are." My mother gasped aloud, covering her mouth with both hands. Sullivan stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the conference table, his eyes wide with disbelief. Preston stopped breathing entirely, staring at the giant screen in sheer terror. Gideon's recorded voice continued, steady and condemning. "I know what they tell people about me. I know they claim my mind is gone, that I am just a confused old man. It is a lie, a calculated, malicious lie. They started spreading those rumors 10 years ago, when I refused to sign my assets over to Preston's trust fund." The loan officer slowly turned his head to look at Preston and Sullivan, his expression morphing from professional outrage into deep, visceral disgust. On the screen, Gideon held up the thick stack of intercepted letters. "Harrison, I wrote to you every single week, but Sullivan and Beatrice intercepted them all. They built a prison around me, Harrison, and they built one around you, too." When the video finally faded to black, the silence in the boardroom was so heavy it felt like it could crush the breath right out of my lungs. My mother was openly weeping now, her perfect makeup running down her face in dark streaks. Sullivan was staring at the blank screen, his jaw working silently, unable to form a single excuse or defense. Preston looked physically ill. He slumped down into his chair, running a trembling hand through his hair. The illusion of the brilliant, successful tech founder was completely shattered. He was exposed as a fraud, a thief, and a parasite. The loan officer did not hesitate. He picked up the forged estate document, placed it in a secure folder, and looked coldly at my brother. "Mr. Carrington, Apex Financial is officially withdrawing this loan offer. Furthermore, it is our strict corporate policy to report any and all instances of attempted mortgage fraud to federal authorities. You will be hearing from our legal department and likely the police very shortly. Get out of my boardroom." Preston did not argue. He did not yell. He stood up on shaky legs, looking like a ghost, and walked toward the door without looking at anyone. My mother tried to grab his arm, crying his name, but he shook her off and disappeared into the hallway. Sullivan finally found his voice. He turned to me, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and desperate fear. "Harrison, you can't do this. We are your family. If Preston goes to jail, it will ruin all of us. The scandal will destroy my business." "You destroyed your own business, Sullivan," I said calmly. I opened my briefcase one last time and pulled out two thick, legal envelopes. I tossed them onto the polished table. They landed with a heavy, satisfying slap. "What is this?" My mother sobbed, staring at the envelopes as if they were venomous snakes. "Those are formal eviction notices," Rosalind stated, stepping forward. "As the legal owner of 405 Elm Street, the Oak and Iron Trust is officially declining to renew the retail lease for your boutique furniture store. Additionally, Preston's tech startup is being served with a pay-or-quit notice for 3 months of unpaid back rent. You have exactly 30 days to clear your inventory and vacate the premises. If you fail to comply, law enforcement will physically remove your property." My mother let out a loud, wailing cry and collapsed into one of the chairs. Sullivan stared at the envelopes, his hands shaking so violently he had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. The power shift was absolute. They had thrown me out into the snow with a trash bag just days ago, telling me I was a useless failure. Now I was standing in a tailored suit, legally tearing their entire world apart, leaving them with nothing but the consequences of their own cruelty. I did not feel joy. I did not feel a sudden rush of happiness. But I felt something much more important. I felt safe. I felt free. "You have 30 days, I repeated softly. "Do not contact me again." I turned around and walked out of the boardroom, Rosalind and Evander following closely behind me. I did not look back. The heavy glass doors swung shut, cutting off the sound of my mother's sobbing. As we walked into the elevator and the doors closed, Evander placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You did well, Harrison. Your grandfather would be incredibly proud of the man you are today." I took a deep breath, feeling the heavy weight of the past 28 years finally lift off my chest. The war was over and I had won. But dealing with the aftermath of toxic people is never quite that simple. They always try one last, desperate grasp for control. If you are watching this and you have ever stood up to toxic people, drop a W in the comments below. It stands for win. I will personally heart and reply to every single comment with a W, because I know exactly how hard it is to take your life back. The fallout from the boardroom confrontation was swift, brutal, and entirely public. You cannot keep a scandal of that magnitude quiet, especially not in the social circles my parents desperately clung to. Word traveled fast. Within 48 hours, the local business community knew that Preston Carrington had been denied a massive loan due to fraudulent collateral. They also knew that Sullivan and Beatrice Carrington were being evicted from their crown jewel retail space by their own estranged son. My phone started blowing up on Friday morning. I was sitting in Rosalind's office, reviewing the final eviction protocols, when the screen lit up with dozens of notifications. The flying monkeys had officially changed their tune. Aunt Cordelia, the woman who had screamed at me and told me I was dead to the family just days prior, left a frantic, tearful voicemail. "Harrison, sweetheart, please call me back. Your mother is having a complete nervous breakdown. We had no idea your grandfather left you that building. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. You know we love you. Please do not throw your family out on the street." Then came a text message from Fletcher, the childhood friend who had mocked me at the lumber yard. "Hey man, just heard the insane news. Always knew you had big things coming. Let's grab a beer this weekend on me. We need to catch up." I stared at the messages, a cold, cynical smile touching my lips. It was amazing how quickly the word failure turned into sweetheart when $14 million entered the conversation. I did not reply. I selected every single number tied to my extended family and blocked them permanently. I did not need their fake apologies. I did not need people who only respected me when I held a knife to their throats financially. But my parents were not going to go down without a chaotic, messy fight. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals always lash out. On Monday morning, Rosalind called me with a sharp edge to her voice. "Harrison, your parents just filed an emergency petition in county court. They are attempting to sue you and the Oak and Iron Trust, claiming undue influence and elder abuse. They are arguing that you coerced Gideon into changing his estate plans, and they are demanding a judge freeze all trust assets immediately." I gripped my coffee mug tightly. Can they actually do that? Can they freeze the trust? "They can try," Rosalind said confidently. "But they are relying on lies and smoke. We are relying on hard, documented facts. I have already contacted the judge's clerk. We have an emergency dismissal hearing scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Wear your suit." The courtroom on Tuesday was tense and suffocatingly quiet. I sat at the defendant's table with Rosalind, my back straight, my hands folded calmly in front of me. Across the aisle, my parents sat with a cheap, frazzled-looking attorney. They looked terrible. Sullivan had dark bags under his eyes, and Beatrice looked frail, her usual arrogant posture replaced by a desperate, nervous twitch. Preston was not there. Rosalind informed me he was currently busy dealing with federal investigators regarding the loan fraud. Their attorney stood up and delivered a rambling, emotional speech about how I had preyed on a sick, confused old man, manipulating him in his final years to steal my brother's rightful inheritance. My mother cried on cue, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, trying to garner sympathy from the judge. The judge, a stern-faced woman with zero tolerance for nonsense, listened patiently. Then she turned to Rosalind. "Counsel, do you have a response?" Rosalind stood up smoothly, opening a thick binder. "Your Honor, this petition is a frivolous, desperate attempt to steal assets from a legally protected trust. We have submitted Exhibit A, a comprehensive 10-year medical history of Gideon Carrington, signed by 3 independent neurologists, confirming he was of perfectly sound mind and body when he established the trust. Exhibit B is a video recording of the deceased, explicitly detailing the severe emotional abuse he suffered at the hands of the petitioners, and his clear intent to leave his estate solely to my client." Rosalind handed the heavy binder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Rosalind continued, her voice echoing in the quiet room, "we are officially filing a countersuit for harassment and requesting a permanent restraining order against Sullivan, Beatrice, and Preston Carrington, since my client legally evicted them for non-payment of rent. They have enlisted family members to barrage him with phone calls, and we have security footage of Sullivan Carrington trespassing near my client's hotel." The judge spent 10 minutes reviewing the medical records and the transcripts of Gideon's video. You could see the exact moment she realized my parents were lying. Her expression hardened into a mask of pure judicial fury. She slammed her gavel down. "Petition to freeze assets is denied with prejudice. This court finds zero evidence of undue influence. In fact, based on the medical affidavits and video evidence provided, I find the petitioner's claims to be entirely fabricated and highly malicious." My father stood up, his face red. "Your Honor, you can't. Sit down and be quiet, Mr. Carrington, or I will hold you in contempt," the judge barked. Sullivan shrank back into his chair. "Based on the evidence of harassment," the judge continued, "I am granting a permanent restraining order against Sullivan, Beatrice, and Preston Carrington. You are forbidden from contacting Harrison Carrington by phone, email, or through third parties. You are forbidden from coming within 500 feet of his residence or person. If you violate this order, you will be arrested immediately. We are adjourned." The crack of the gavel echoed like a gunshot. It was over. The legal shield was in place. My parents were officially, legally barred from my life. As Rosalind and I packed up our briefcases, I looked over at my parents one last time. They did not look angry anymore. They just looked broken, terrified, and incredibly small. The reality of their ruined reputation and impending bankruptcy was finally setting in. I walked out of the courtroom into the bright afternoon sunlight. I breathed in deeply, the cool air filling my lungs. The desperate grasp of my toxic family had been broken. But there was still one final interaction left, one last thread to sever before I could truly begin my new life. The 30-day eviction notice came and went with brutal efficiency. I did not go to 405 Elm Street to watch them leave. I had no desire to gloat over their misery in person. Evander arranged for a property management team and local law enforcement to oversee the physical move-out process. From what I was told, it was a humiliating spectacle. Preston's tech startup was officially bankrupt, his servers and expensive office furniture seized by creditors to pay off his massive debts. He was currently out on bail, facing serious federal charges for wire fraud and attempted bank fraud. My parents' boutique furniture store fared no better. Without the illusion of endless wealth to prop them up, their suppliers demanded immediate payment for outstanding invoices. They had to liquidate their entire inventory at rock-bottom prices just to afford a small, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. The Grand Carrington family legacy, built entirely on lies, arrogance, and my grandfather's stolen money, had crumbled into dust in less than a month. I spent those 30 days quietly laying the foundation for my own future. I bought a modest, beautiful piece of land just outside the city limits. It had a small, sturdy farmhouse and a massive steel barn that I immediately began converting into a state-of-the-art woodworking shop. I did not want a mansion. I did not want to buy luxury sports cars or expensive watches. I just wanted peace, quiet, and the freedom to work with my hands without anyone telling me I was a failure. It was late on a Friday evening. I was standing in my new, empty workshop, breathing in the scent of fresh pine and oil, sweeping sawdust off the concrete floor. The silence was golden. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an unknown number. My legal team had advised me not to answer unknown calls due to the restraining order, but something in my gut told me to pick it up. I pressed accept and raised the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said cautiously. For a long moment, there was only the sound of heavy, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. Then, a voice spoke. It was weak, trembling, and barely recognizable. "Harrison." It was Sullivan, my father. I froze, my hand tightening around the broom handle. "You are violating a court-ordered restraining order," I said, my voice cold and devoid of any emotion. "I am hanging up and calling the police." "Wait. Please, just wait. Just give me 1 minute," Sullivan cried out. His voice cracked, sounding incredibly desperate. "Please, son, don't hang up." Hearing him call me son sent a strange, uncomfortable shiver down my spine. He had not called me that in years. Not since I was a little boy. "You have 60 seconds, I said flatly. "We lost everything," Sullivan sobbed, the sound pathetic and raw over the phone speaker. "The house is in foreclosure. The store is gone. Preston is looking at 3 years in federal prison, and the lawyers took every cent we had left just to keep him out on bail. Your mother won't stop crying. She can't get out of bed. We are living in a tiny apartment, Harrison. We don't have enough money for groceries next week." I stood there in the quiet barn, looking out the window at the stars shining brightly in the clear night sky. I felt a slight twinge in my chest, a phantom echo of the boy who used to crave this man's love. But the man holding the phone was a survivor, and survivors do not jump back into the fire just because the flames are crying. "Why are you calling me, Sullivan?" I asked. "We need help," he pleaded, his voice breaking into a full sob. "You have $14 million. You own the trust. Just give us a little bit. Just enough to help Preston with his legal fees. Just enough to help your mother and me get back on our feet. We are your family, Harrison. You can't just leave us to rot. We are sorry. We are so sorry for everything." I closed my eyes. The apology sounded nice, but it was hollow. It was not born from guilt or self-reflection. It was born entirely from panic. "You are not sorry for how you treated me," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, unwavering whisper. "You are just sorry you lost. You are sorry you got caught. You are sorry that the punching bag you abused for 28 years suddenly turned around and knocked you out." "That isn't true," Sullivan wept. We love you. No, you don't, I replied, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over me. Love is not transactional. Love does not kick your child out into a blizzard with a trash bag on Christmas Eve. Love does not intercept letters from a dying grandfather. Money does not change people, Sullivan. It just exposes exactly who they have always been. You threw me away when you thought I had no value. Now you are crying because you realize I hold all the value. This is not a family relationship. This is a failed business transaction. And the transaction is over. Harrison, please, do not ever call this number again, I said firmly. If you or Beatrice or Preston try to contact me, I will send the police to your cheap apartment, and I will have you arrested for violating the restraining order. Goodbye, Sullivan. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red end call button. I immediately blocked the unknown number and sent a quick text to Rosalind, documenting the violation just in case they tried it again. I put the phone back in my pocket and picked up my broom. I swept the last pile of sawdust into the dustpan, turned off the bright overhead lights, and walked out into the cool, peaceful night. I looked back at the large steel barn, the foundation of my new life. The final shift of power was complete. I was no longer a victim of the Carrington family. I was just Harrison, and for the first time in my entire life, that was more than enough. Months passed, and the brutal, chaotic winter gave way to a bright, vibrant spring. The snow melted, the ground thawed, and the world outside my farmhouse burst into a brilliant shade of green. The frantic energy of lawsuits, evictions, and family drama slowly faded into the background, replaced by the steady, rhythmic sound of a table saw and the comforting smell of cut wood. I spent my days building the life I had always dreamed of. My new workshop was fully operational. It was massive, filled with top-of-the-line tools, heavy-duty machinery, and stacks of premium imported lumber. I did not start a massive corporate furniture company, and I did not try to become a flashy CEO like Preston. I stayed true to what I loved. I built custom, handcrafted wooden furniture, heavy dining tables made of solid walnut, intricate oak bookshelves, and sturdy cedar bed frames. Word of mouth spread quickly in the local community, and soon I had a waiting list of clients stretching out for 6 months. I managed the Oak and Iron Trust carefully with Evander and Rosalind. We sold the Elm Street building to a major corporate developer, removing the last physical tie to my parents' toxic history. We diversified the portfolio, ensuring the wealth Grandpa Gideon had built would continue to grow steadily for generations to come. But I knew that keeping the money locked away in bank accounts was not what Gideon would have wanted. He had spent his entire life hiding his wealth to protect it from greedy people. Now that it was safe, it needed to serve a purpose. It needed to do good. On a warm afternoon in late May, I drove downtown to the local community college. I walked into the financial aid office and sat down with the director. Using the funds from the trust, I officially established the Gideon Carrington Memorial Scholarship. It was a fully funded program designed specifically for young adults who had aged out of the foster care system, or who had been disowned and abandoned by their families. It paid for their tuition, their housing, and their tools if they wanted to enter a trade school for carpentry, plumbing, or electrical work. I wanted to make sure that anyone who found themselves standing out in the cold with nothing but a trash bag full of clothes had a place to go. I wanted to give them the safety net my grandfather had given me. As I signed the final endowment papers, the director looked at me with a warm, grateful smile. "This is going to change a lot of lives, Mr. Carrington. Your grandfather must have been an incredible man." "He was," I said softly, looking at my signature on the paper. "He was the best man I ever knew. My life now is quiet, and I fiercely protect that peace. I do not have a large circle of friends, but the ones I do have are genuine." Evander comes out to the farmhouse occasionally to drink a beer on the porch and discuss investments. Rosalind stops by whenever she needs a custom piece of furniture for her sleek downtown office. I have a golden retriever named Bandit who sleeps under my workbench while I sand down oak panels. I never heard from my parents again after that final, desperate phone call. Rosalind kept an eye on public records for me, mostly for security reasons. Preston eventually accepted a plea deal for the mortgage fraud. He was sentenced to 36 months in a minimum security federal prison. Sullivan and Beatrice filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy and quietly faded into obscurity, living out their days in a cramped apartment. Entirely cut off from the high society world they had sacrificed their own son to belong to. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is totally silent, I take the heavy brass key out of my desk drawer. I hold it in my palm, feeling the cool metal against my skin, and I trace the engraved numbers with my thumb. It reminds me of how quickly everything can change. It reminds me that family is not defined by blood, but by respect, loyalty, and unconditional care. They told me I was a failure. They told me I could not do a single thing on my own. But as I look around at the home I own, the business I built, and the legacy I am preserving, I know the absolute truth. I did not fail. I survived them, and in the end, surviving them was the greatest success of my life. There are many people in my extended family, the aunts and cousins who eventually heard the full story, who whisper behind my back. They say I am too cold-blooded. They say that no matter what Sullivan and Beatrice did, they were still my parents, and I should not have stripped them of their dignity and left them in poverty while sitting on millions of dollars. They argue that throwing your own flesh and blood out on the street, even legally, makes me just as cruel as they were. But I firmly believe that I only took back what my grandfather entrusted to me, and I let them suffer the natural consequences of their own toxic greed. I refused to let them abuse me anymore. What do you think? Was I too cold-blooded for leaving my parents and brother with absolutely nothing? Or did they get exactly the karma they deserved? Should I have given them a second chance once the truth came out? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. You guys act as the jury on this one. Thank you so much for watching my story until the very end. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like on this video so you never miss out on more dramatic, true Reddit stories. See you in the next one.